Good evening. For those of you I haven't met at the gallery, I thought I could do without. Welcome to the New School. I am delighted to announce this listening session, a gathering around organized listening, sound art, collectivity, and politics. And as I think all of you know, it's presented in connection with the exhibition Vogue'ology, which opened yesterday, but had the real glamorous, wonderful reception just a few minutes ago at the Aronson Gallery at Parsons, the New School for Design. We are delighted and honored and very grateful to Ultra Red for having worked with the Verlis Center for many, many months in developing the show and then a series of public events, of which this one is the first one. And I'd like to particularly thank Don Ryan, a founding member of Ultra Red, and Robert Sember, who is one of the 209-210 Verlis Center Fellows. They will explain how this gathering will evolve, but please join me in welcoming them, and thank you all very much for coming.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I am Robert Sember, and this is Don Ryan. The work on Vogue'ology began about a year ago when I began the fellowship. It was a wonderful opportunity for me to return to relationships and issues that I had been working on for a number of years when I was very deeply immersed in the field of public health. I had developed a very strong conviction in the course of the work that I had been doing in public health that the House Ballroom scene had developed and was continuing to develop and evolve an indigenous critique of power, which was one of the most profound structural analyses of the conditions that produced all kinds of oppressions, oppressions with which we are deeply familiar. Racism, homophobia, gender oppression, as well as the oppressions of poverty and income inequalities. And there was a deep analysis of power that is performed on a regular basis in the context of the House Ballroom scene. And as is almost always the condition with oppression, the terms of liberation will be granted to us from those who suffer most the structures of oppression. And it is through the process of a deep collective listening, a deep respect and attention to experience and the analysis that arises from experience that Vogue'ology is dedicated and devoted. Abit Santana Ivisu, founding mother of the House of Latex and founding mother of the House of Ivisu, has been the great inspiration to us in this work of Vogue'ology, along with a number of people in this room to whom I pay enormous homage and offer my most humble respects for what you do every day in your lives. When we were thinking of how to carry through some of the themes of this project into a series of events, one of the first things that we wanted to focus on was this issue of collectivity. And what we in Ultra Red refer to as organized listening. And the term organized is intentionally chosen to suggest political organizing. And the relationship between the organizing of collective listening and political organizing and the mobilization that arises out of effective organizing is one of the conjunctions that is the focus of our work. We are deeply rooted in the processes and practices of pedagogy, and particularly the participatory and collective pedagogies that have been foundational to many of the liberation struggles across the world, particularly the Global South. We derive an enormous amount of inspiration and a great deal of the terminology as well as the procedures and practices from the enormous and ongoing struggles against colonialism, against imperialism, and we must note very particularly our study of and a debt to the popular education movements of Latin America. We situated these questions of pedagogy at the center of our work a few years ago when we initiated what is now a multi-year, multi-part program of projects called the School of Echoes. We consider Vogue'ology to be part of the ongoing development of the School of Echoes projects. In the course of the development of the School of Echoes projects, we have begun to formulate a series of very simple procedures. These procedures are based on investigation and themselves are always an investigation of procedure and practice. Every opportunity we have to gather and to collect in listening is for us an opportunity to investigate some slight adjustment to a procedure in order to refine our appreciation for participatory listening. Tonight is one of the procedures. It is a procedure that we have followed before with some differences. So we are here investigating this process of collective listening, and we invite you to participate collectively in an investigation of the processes of collective listening. The procedure is very simple. We have invited a number of people to contribute sounds in response to the question, what is the sound of collectivity in your work and or life? There are 8 sounds. Don and I have contributed sounds as well. We will listen to each of these sounds in turn. Following the playing of each sound, we will invite all of you and any of you to approach the table and to write your response to the question, what did you hear? You may also choose to speak your response into one of these 2 microphones. You can speak your response rather than write it. You can speak your response and write it, or you can write your response without speaking it. We will give approximately 1.5 minutes after each sound to do that. Once the 8 sounds have been played, those who contributed the sounds will be invited to contribute a statement, whatever it is that they wish to say in response to the listening of their own sounds, but also to the listening to the listening. We will follow those statements with an open discussion. The final thing I want to say is a little bit about the process of listening. It can be somewhat confusing to identify how to actually approach this question of listening. Pierre Schaeffer, one of the great theorists and practitioners of sound in the last century, often spoke about 4 different kinds of listening. Schaeffer was, for all intents and purposes, the founder of musique concrète, the way in which the introduction of technology of recording fundamentally shifted our relationship to sound. Schaeffer talked about listening to the cause or for the cause of a sound, or listening in association to the sound. What does this sound make me think of? Or having a somewhat sort of philosophical response to the sound, an interpretive or hermeneutic response to the sound. And the 4th is listening to the actual qualities of the sound, its grain, its volume, the the physical properties, in a certain sense, of the sound. So if those 4 sort of inflections of listening are of help to you, please use them. Otherwise, just follow your ears. So we will start.
Okay, recording number 1. What did you hear?
Meaning is in the background.
The elevator cabin?
Recording number 2.
You know, more of like a general frustration.
So
Was that? Do I have any ideas?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, stuff that I actually have a very specific, like, is that the way Beaver functioned for many years, and I think it still has that potential, is that we would say, like, one event would happen, someone would bring up something like that and say, so analytical about what? And then you would say about this, well, let's do it next Monday. Yeah. Right? And then there was that's what I mean. So basically, the less frequent the events, the more they become meta and like It's kind of like relationships that go bad only talk about how they're doing bad, you know? It's kind of, and I agree, you know, but basically the way to go over that is to just kind of get into the, you know, so like what would you like to do?
What's your
Like what?
project?
Like
What's my project? I mean, what I do is I put together film and video shows here.
Yeah.
What would I like to do here? I'd like to do, I mean, I think what I would like to do right now is, I'm really interested in, you know, the use of spaces, specific uses of spaces.
What did you hear?
Individuals supported by the company they're in well enough to feel free expressing themselves.
We follow.
Okay, recording number 3. What did you hear?
Music and engines and tire and talk and echoes.
I heard something that I miss very much.
I heard privilege of people that can visit and people that can't leave.
Recording number 4. What did you hear?
A haunted subway.
I heard sounds, sounds in airspace of moving traffic.
Laurie Anderson waiting for the bus in Pittsburgh.
Okay, recording number 5, sorry. What did you hear?
When the microphone is overloaded, it's hard to distinguish joy from terror or people from geese.
I could be wrong, but it sounded like the Chilean miner rescue.
I heard a muffled traumatic scene.
It's that voice message you get at 3 o'clock in the morning where you think either this person has drunk dialed me and is having a really good time, or I should call for help.
All right. Recording number 6 and 7.
Did Aunt Ellie have her surgery?
right. The eighth and final recording.
I mean, we've got the illustration to do here, so.
I want you to understand. I'm going to be right. We're going to take any syringes, any cookers that we see. We're going to write a report.
Are you recording that, sir?
Yeah, he's with us. Yeah, he has the right to record anything we want.
Yes, I do. Talk to me.
Well, get your goon out of here. I mean...
No, this is a police detective. He's not a goon.
Yeah, he is a goon. He was a goon last week, and he's a bigger goon this week.
No.
If you want to have a discussion with me, maybe you should move him a few feet away.
No, we have 50
You got 20 people
that'll watch
around here.
So
Good. Yeah, who knows what the fuck they'd be doing if they weren't here. Yes. I'm a little agitated, excuse me. This is the fourth week this has been going on. All right, so I'm losing my patience here. We have a right to do this program.
No, you don't have a right
Yes,
to
we
do
do.
the program. You're violating the law.
So what? For 2 years we violated the law and it wasn't an issue.
Well,
So why is it an
it's
issue now?
It's an issue now. You are violating the law.
What did you hear?
White people fighting with the cops and not getting arrested.
Democracy through mutual antagonism.
Before we move into the phase where the contributors of sound will share any statements they wish before we open it up for discussion, I'd like very much if everybody in the room could at least say their name. I'm going to pass a microphone in that back row. If you could just quickly move the mic and just say your name, and then we'll do the same thing on this side.
Michelle.
Derek.
Berlin.
Josh.
Tyra.
Sylvia.
Alan.
Natalie. Lisa.
Thomas.
David.
Simba.
Erica.
Harut. Alex.
Douglas says.
Gerard.
Sana.
Minka.
Lexi.
Pumi.
Nick. Christian.
Sienna.
Alexandra. Halston.
Karina.
Karen.
Jaso.
Lex.
Maria Fernanda.
Leon.
Lindsay. Janelle.
Eric.
Marlena.
Emily.
Deviki.
Oh, sorry. Carolyn.
Carolyn number 2.
Deshawn. Duan. Dave.
Jalen.
Kay.
David.
Lydia.
Julie.
Keoru. Lucia.
Janine.
Paul. Davi M.
Sheila.
Garrick.
Sophie.
Jenny and Dorothy.
Darla.
James.
Judy.
Danielle.
Amanda.
Annie.
Arbert.
Erica.
Daisy. I'm Kendra.
Safa.
Mario.
Who's next?
Jamal.
Don.
Robert.
Edgar Rivera Colon.
Stephanie.
Karen.
Larry. John.
Dan.
Okay. Must be inclusive.
Joe.
Do we have everyone? Okay, great. Thank you. So, Edgar. Okay. Brother Edgar, would you like to begin with a statement? Right there.
Not the big mic, actually. With the guys.
Yeah, sure.
No, that would be a pleasure. I think it's actually a health plan. I'm going to begin. I chose sounds, the outside of St. John the Divine Cathedral, the Morningside Heights Road, where you can look into the Valley of Harlem, where I've spent a lot of time looking into the Valley of Harlem. And I chose a Bomba Plena Puerto Rican history event at the Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian Church in Brooklyn, where a friend of mine is deacon and the other friend is elder. And Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian Church is a hidden underground railroad church. It was the clandestine, and it still remains a progressive church. So I'm going to read from the Word. To Christians, the Word of God is not contained in the Bible. It begins there. So I'm going to read Deleuze. Individuals find a real name for themselves, rather, only through the harshest exercise in depersonalization, by opening themselves up to the multiplicities everywhere within them, to the intensities running through them. And then I'm going to quote a little line from a poem I wrote, and it's a simple line. HIB for prevention is another computer language. I chose St. John the Divine because it's a fixed view. It will be where my ashes will be put into a wall when I die. And because the Valley of Harlem is near. And it's that valley where East Harlem and West Harlem, collard greens and rice and beans meet. And that's the historical origins of the New York City ballroom. The first house was La Beja, an African-American rearticulation of La Bella, Crystal La Beja. Therefore, the house ballroom scene is both Puerto Rican and black at its origins, and part of the African diaspora. And we in the African diaspora, even light-skinned members like me, ask, where will my body lie? And so does the ballroom scene. I chose Brooklyn and Bomba Plena, which is the song and newscast of Africans in Puerto Rico, because it tells us about motion in a place. And the runway tells us about fixity and motion and the transformation of the body and the dying body and the living body, and the possibility that the runway and the bodies that occupy it and the bodies that support those on the runway can lead to transformation of time. To be a Christian is to want to inhabit another body. The body producing space between the runway and the empty tomb. The empty tomb being sign of resurrection of a different body, a multiplicity of genders. And that transformation is what is always at stake in the runway. Getting life in the ballroom scene. Getting life means getting adoration, being seen, being loved before you die, being loved after you die. It answers the question, where will our bodies lie?
Karen, can I ask you if you have a statement you'd like to make in response to your recording? Do you want to stay here or do you want to join me up here? No?
Well, it's that making statements sounds very serious, and I was not prepared to make a statement. But when someone is asked to make a statement, I think that seriousness is somehow concentrating you to really figure out among different voices you have inside what is that one that you really want to make something special to share with people. And I think also related to the piece that I choose to show here, that sound of collective sound is a very serious thing, because I think when you are dealing with so many voices and sounds that we also experienced here, there is a moment of loneliness and feeling of so you feel so small with the sound of the big world and sounds of that you are seeing all around you, and the feeling of collective sound when you collectively put together your sounds for something. I think maybe that is a statement I want to make, that if there is a single moment in life when you can raise your voice, and that raising of voice is not just simply raising a voice, but really putting the sound of your voice for something common, sharing with others, it's a very happy moment. And coming back to this 1 minute that I choose, that was a part of my and also a small group of people everyday commitment to raise that voice for getting 3 soldiers who were tortured to admit life imprisonment in Armenia for crimes they didn't do.
So that moment is particularly the moment that we are getting them out from jail after 3 years of fighting for them. And there are a lot of people there that we see first time, including some of their family members, some people who were just coming to visit their son in jails, and that moment of collective screaming of these soldiers coming out from prison, and that moment of joy, of screams and looking at each other and sharing that power of sound together. It's an amazing feeling, even re-looking, re-listening to it, and so that would be maybe my statement, that if you have a moment of life when you can raise your voice in collective sharing of the goal you have, that's a power of voice, maybe.
Where's Alex? Alex? Oh, come here. Caught you off guard, didn't I?
Hello. Sorry, nature called. Well, I wanted to actually first respond to, I loved the comments about the sound that I brought in. One was haunted subway, and another one was Laurie Anderson waiting for the bus in Pittsburgh, both of which are actually pretty spot on. The piece is called A Ballad of Accounting, and it's a piece which I worked on for about 4 years, and it's the recordings of the cello underneath the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. The piece began as a way of inviting what was outside of my window into my work. So it was a way of looking at this image of circulation, or for the builder of the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, Robert Moses, who saw his work almost as a sort of maniacal artistic vision of circulation as the symbol of capitalism. You know, looking at the Brooklyn Queens Expressway at these various times of day, when it's moving, when it's not moving, when there's helicopters floating over it, when there's accidents, when there's sirens, all of these things which in any other kind of acoustic community might be the sound of bells which gather you, the sound of, you know, there's other sort of sonic tags which the highway has, and from where I was living at the time, it was literally, you know, a block and a half from where I lived, and every time I would sit down to try to work on a composition, it was always in any microphone that I put anywhere in the house. It was there, so I figured, well, I better just make a piece with the highway. And then I received an invitation to make to participate as a busker in a work which would involve 100 different street musicians performing Ewan MacColl and Peggy Seeger's work from 1964, this piece called A Ballad of Accounting, and the lyrics of which maybe I'll read a couple lines from when I finish. But it's an amazing piece, and for me as an instrumentalist, being someone who is normally quite speechless when I'm playing, I had two challenges. One was the fact that the busking was to take place in London, and I was here in New York, and I had no way to get over there. And the other was that I don't sing. So I proposed that I would do the piece under the Brooklyn Queens Expressway with my cello, and that's how this began. So it's essentially, to get back to why both comments were so spot on. In the one case, the haunted subway is a beautiful image because the particular moment which you're listening to is the sound of the pipes, which are carrying the sound, the resonant sound from what's happening up above down below. So it is the sound of traffic internalized. And besides that, at this point in the piece, all the sounds of the highway are recorded from inside of the cello. So there's a microphone that's inside of the cello, which is basically what the piece is trying to do is to stand up to, a single voice trying to stand up to this anonymous circulation of traffic that will never hear me play, that will never be my audience, obviously. But to speak to it, to try to create a kind of protest song, but of course it doesn't work. It's a speechless protest song. And at this point the cello is literally swallowing up the highway, or trying to. And then it harmonizes with the highway. And at the very end there's a kind of a compromise that happens between the two, where they decide that both will become white noise. So both become the sound of traffic in the distance. And, well, Laurie Anderson, I could come back to another time. But I'll just read a couple lines from the original song, which is really beautiful. In the morning, we built the city. In the afternoon, walked through its streets. Evening saw us leaving. We wandered through our days as if they would never end. All of us imagined we had endless time to spend. We hardly saw the crossroads, and small attention gave to landmarks on the journey, from the cradle to the grave, cradle to the grave, cradle to the grave. Did you learn to dream in the morning, abandon dreams in the afternoon, wait without hope in the evening? Did you stand there in the traces and let them feed you lies? Did you trail along behind them, wearing blinkers on your eyes? Did you kiss the foot that kicked you? Did you thank them for their scorn? Did you ask for their forgiveness for the act of being born, act of being born, act of being born?
Reverend Roots.
So in order to answer the question, the sound of collectivity, it was important for me to revisit the space of isolation, which I understand to be an incredibly important process in the process of being reborn through initiation, the space of isolation first, death, rebirth, and then reintegration into the community and into the collective with a standing. You've been through something, now we see you for who you are. And my sound was the first sound that was recorded in an elevator shaft, in a loft in Dumbo. And I went back to that space because I was, I think 7 years ago now, I was trapped in that elevator during a time in my life where I was really isolated and really trying to figure out what my standing was in my community. I knew that I felt called to serve in some way, but I wasn't sure if the community wanted me, if they really saw me for who I thought I was or who I could be. And being stuck in that elevator shaft, rather than waiting, I decided I was going to get myself out of it. I climbed out of the cage and attempted to climb down what I thought was an emergency ladder in the elevator shaft, and it wasn't one. And I plummeted 4.5 stories down to the sub-basement. What I discovered on the other side of that, and seeking to free myself from isolation, and really at that time wanting to just get away from everyone and everybody to find myself, was that there was no escape. I found myself in the ICU at Bellevue, surrounded by the very community that I thought that I didn't want me. There had to be 15 or 20 people there at the time. My mother, my roommates, my partner, cousins, friends. And through the haze of all the drugs that I was on, I think I had maybe 3 surgeries by that point. The first words that came out of my mouth were, "What are you all doing here?" But what I saw clearly for the first time is where I fit into this amazing web that these lives, all these lives around me had created. I knew for certain that my healing could not happen within a separate container and of isolation, but had to happen within this community experience. That my healing was not just my own healing, it was the healing of the community. That I had to reclaim my body and get out of that bed and walk again, as a testimony to our love for each other. And how that relates to me to the ballroom community is that's what I see there. It's a reclaiming of bodies, a reclaiming of, it's moving out of spaces of isolation into this large community and reclaiming self and cementing one's place within that community is extremely important, one's status, and getting that life, knowing that you are not alone. Falling, free falling, dipping, spinning, landing safely, and seeing all those faces surrounding you. There's some pictures that I've seen of faces looking over someone just laid out, you know, just giving them their life, and they rise from that, rise to that applause and to that love. I knew then that I mattered. I knew then that I couldn't run away from myself or my community anymore, that I had to stand strong and I had to get better. I had to get well. But one thing I knew, even falling in the elevator shaft, I don't know if you guys know the Warner Brothers cartoons, Wile E. Coyote, when he goes off the edge of that cliff and he puts up that sign, it's like frozen space, and it's like, uh-oh. That's exactly what it felt like, you know, frozen in time. But I knew that I would be okay. There was a certainty that I knew that I was going to smash myself up into bits and pieces, but I knew that if I fell safely, if I didn't panic, if I didn't fear, if I had faith in that free fall, that I would be okay. That's it.
Jason, would you like to say something about the recording? Okay, great.
Just sit next to someone. Please. Hi. I'm here because my friend Paige couldn't be here tonight, and she selected the recording that you heard. That was the second one. You heard a bunch of people talking in a room, and I really liked the comment I think you made. Can't remember what it was, but I thought that was spot on. The comfort, people talking in a comfortable situation or a gathering. It was not quite, it was comfortable, but it was intense. So that was a group of people who meet at 16 Beaver Space. And I have been part of that collective for a number of years, and also Karen and Harut are here. And I'm here because of friendship and because of just the love that I have for my friends who I see and meet at that space. And it's just the only thing I can say is that it's a space of love, and a space where we cook and eat and talk in a comfortable but sometimes intense way. So I don't know how much of that was translated in that 1-minute clip, but I encourage you all to come and visit us right after this event, actually. Tonight, we have an event going on there. So, yeah. Thank you.
We've heard a number of statements about passages, about moving from solitude into collectivity, about the promise of resurrection and of new life, and incredible contradictions of desire, of longing to be something that you are not, and also longing to be renewed in some way. One of the privileges, and often one of the demands, that I have encountered as an artist in that sort of space of permission that the sort of social status of the artist is given from time to time, is the possibility of a kind of solitude and attentiveness, and at the same time the extraordinary demands to actually articulate a transformation, something new, something that is going to be a unique vision or voice. The sound I chose was, in fact, in a certain sense, a sound that is associated with what I would say is almost the failure of collectivity. I was recently invited to a congress, as it is called, in Europe. Europeans seem to, especially in the art world, seem to have stopped having conferences and are now having congresses. And there seems to be a profound misunderstanding of the distinction between a conference and a congress. A congress is when delegates who have a responsibility to a constituency are invited to convene in order to discuss issues of relevance to the constituency, which they then take back to those constituencies to whom they are beholden. This Congress was convened as part of a very ambitious program called the Former West, which is an attempt to try and assess the status of Europe 20 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was decided to hold the event in Istanbul, because Istanbul is, of course, traditionally understood as the place where East and West meet. Istanbul is also within Turkey, and Turkey is attempting to gain membership to the European Union, a membership that it is constantly being denied because it is considered to be a majority, which it is, and it is considered a problem, majority Muslim country. We gathered in a room with the windows closed and the shades drawn for 3 days, listening to mournful pontifications about the failures of the West. What we never heard was the city beyond those windows and that room. And certainly what we never heard was any discussion of process or strategy to be able to respond to the lamentations around the failures of the West. The occasions that I had to leave that room and to wander through the city of Istanbul and to hear the call of the mezuzin in the evening and to walk through the Egyptian spice market, to hear the sounds of cheap toys from China playing their music, and the gathering of people represented such a profound contradiction to the structures of an art world, at least as I was encountering it at that moment, that seemed determined to be impervious to the collectivity that lay just beyond its own borders. The 3 days ended without any sense of how we, as a constituency, an art constituency, invested in some way in the politics of the left, may in fact move forward. It was one of the most depressing experiences that I have had as an artist. To experience simultaneously the elevation of the artist as in some way the one who can announce a call to a new vision or a new world, and at the same time the extraction of that artist from the world that was intended to be engaged in some way in struggle. That was my sound.
I'm going to make a few comments about the recording that I provided, and then we'll open up for a discussion to hear what you all heard over the course of this evening together. Mine was the last recording, and this is the recording from 1994, July 1994. It took place on the street of Cosmo, which is one block east of Cahuenga Boulevard in Hollywood. And for much of the 90s, Needle Exchange provided harm reduction services for injection drug users in Hollywood, at the corner, near the corner of Cosmo and Selma in Hollywood. I and Marco Larson, who were the founders of Ultra Red in 1994, in May, 2 months before this recording, we were activists with the Needle Exchange in Hollywood. And the person holding the microphone was Marco. And the person speaking to the cops was Renee Edgington, who was the sort of director of Clean Needles Now, which was the name of the Needle Exchange. For those of you who don't know, Needle Exchange, up until, 2 years ago, with the Obama administration, who legalized federal funding for needle exchange programs in the United States. Up till that point, Needle Exchange was, for all intents and purposes, illegal in the United States of America, even though every single president, from Reagan through Clinton and George W., every single president had appointed a commission to study needle exchange, and every commission came up with the same results, which is that needle exchange is one of the most effective ways of providing HIV prevention for people who inject drugs. Very simply, it helps people reduce the risk of sharing their needles, the need to share their needles, by providing them access to unused needles. And you would think with such a common sense approach to harm reduction and to HIV prevention, this would be a no-brainer. But as we all know, the presidency is often a no-brain position. Anyway, about 2 years ago, this was legalized. This, for me, is a very important sort of recording on so many levels. One has to do with my own ghosts, which is Renee, who passed away several years ago in a car accident. And just knowing that many of the people who I was standing with at that day are no longer with us. And for me, an experience of activism is the sort of origin story, if you will, for Ultra Red and for this collective, this art collective, and a kind of constant wrestling with or constant contending with the demands and the contradictions between art and politics. And I think what we hear much frequently, actually Annie and I were having a discussion about this yesterday, we hear much frequently that the contradiction of art and politics is generally resolved in one of two ways. One has to do with a kind of philosophical notion of politics. That is, a discussion of politics where there is no actual lived experience in the room. And another way that the contradiction between art and politics is resolved is that the artist is seen as the political protagonist, the one who delivers the analysis. And I think one of the things that will be with me forever as a result of my work with Needle Exchange and before that with ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, was a sort of coming to terms with what it means to actually hold into place very profound contradictory positions between silence equaling death, and as Paulo Freire once said, silence as the condition for listening. Not to resolve those contradictions, but to inhabit them, to live with them, and to see them as the birthplace of solidarity. the solidarity with people that you love and with people you've just met, but who are together with you in a struggle against oppression and a struggle against the exploitation of suffering. So that would be my statement. So we would love to, at this point, turn it over to all of you, and to ask you, what did you hear this evening? And this question about what is the sound of collectivity? What is the sound of solidarity? What is the sound of renewal through collectivity? What would you like to say? Yes. I'm going to ask you to speak into the mic, if I can, so we can all hear you and you don't have to shout.
I heard a profound hunger for community and for love, for reaching out as a community and also reaching in as an interior community. And I heard a deep, painful sadness of, just the general neglect of society and not the impotence of bridging that gap and the profound indifference of generally the larger community that surrounds the community. And it's I think it was like a very painful, horrific realization that I came to, and it's very sad. And I want to really thank you for your presentations.
What did you hear? Anyone?
A call to use the voice I'm giving as an artist and to consider it very carefully, because when you do have people's ears and they are focused on you, they can hear a lot. And sometimes what they're hearing, what you're putting out there, and what they hear, it sometimes can be a much more accurate and powerful communication than maybe I give it credit for. And so more inspiration in the power that I do have as an artist. So I felt, I heard inspiration.
I think in all of them, excuse me, I heard necessary pain. Like the pain you have to go through to get to the other side. In all of them, in some way, some more than others, I heard that. Especially with the last one, I heard someone that was going through whatever she was going through, and she was not backing down. And that kind of rang true in pretty much everyone, in some way, in big or small. Just, you have to get through what you have to get through to get to where you have to be. And that's what I got from all of them. Yeah, that's it.
Let me see if I can articulate this. I heard the sound of writing, which sounded like sounds of safety for people wanting to share, but share on their own terms in a way. And I think that was reflected, I think it was iterative and allegorical in even the fact of doing this whole thing. So.
So maybe I can try to say, actually, I didn't listen anything. It's very intense, and at the same time, the sound, there is no space, there is a body, there is no body actually. There is a space, but there is no body. There is a body without space, or there is a space and you cannot find where is the body, or there is a sound and you cannot find the space. So it's mean, you're confusing, and it's mean I didn't listen anything. But at the same time, it's not silent. I didn't listen silent, and at the same time I didn't listen anything.
I think I found felt a very a sense of longing. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I kind of got was the idea of the struggle to be who you want to be, and how beautiful and painful at the same time it is to struggle to completely be that person, whoever that person is, that you hold deep inside of you. That's the thing I think everyone fights to find in themselves. And I'm sure it changes when you get older and stuff like that, but it's something that is a process always. And each sound in some way was in a different place, in a different time, and in a different space. And each time it was different, but we grew from it.
I heard the individual and the subjective experience as it exists within the masses and the community, specifically like this city, and how empowering it is to feel that that individually is understood or heard by the masses, and regardless of that subjective experience from the masses, like, it is empowering to be heard.
Today I kind of struggled listening, and I always find myself when I listen to kind of figure out my connection to the sound, and when I get distracted is when I feel less connected to it, and then sounds that are very familiar, then my attention span becomes clearer, and the connectivity to that sound is familiar, and then I go places. I can make my own associations of what I hear and make my own assumptions. Sometimes when things get too complicated in terms of sound, for me, I struggle to listen. And today, some of the sounds were difficult to listen and hear, so it was a struggling to kind of find my association to that particular sound. But all in all, I felt the connection and the connectivity of wanting to connect and be part of something.
I never speak on mic, but I heard a lot of sameness. I heard Africa, I heard India, and a lot of ums.
I'm also equally uncomfortable speaking in public, but what was refreshing for me about, I guess, being a part of this gathering is that the notion of collectivity could be spoken about on such abstract levels, and I noticed that everyone that spoke into the room, into the microphone or at the table, spoke from a very specific subject position and from a very direct lived experience, as has been stressed over and over again. And it's just a really nice change, I think, from going back to your own experience with like these art world events or discussions about collectivity or change on a very broad level that almost goes nowhere. And it was really nice, I think, to hear people speak from a very specific position, a personal position.
I was also reminded of I mean, the question itself had me stumped for a week. Just this, you know, what is organized listening, or what is the sound of organizing? And you know, it was walking over here that I realized that organization, of course, is also a form of, or composition is essentially organizing. And tonight, it was really apparent how contingent listening was upon everybody doing it together, and how that was a form of collective composing, as much as it was a kind of collective listening. And for somebody such as myself, who music is the way that I learn, it was a really powerful example of how the facet of collective listening and composing together became just so much a process of not just learning. And I thought, I just have to say how beautiful it was to hear everybody's names. That was in itself an amazing piece of music. Yeah.
I want to say it's interesting how when there is a task, listen to something. I think the immediate feeling is, oh, there is a game, so you should listen so you can later interpret and is it right or not. So, and when you are in collective and you are listening, oh, what's this person said, the other person said, and then I in the middle I said, oh, this is so funny. We are all always in this game of, can we really find the common interpretation of a sound, and then ask someone who made it and say, oh, I was right, so I felt right. So, and then at the same time, it is, I think, related also how fast we are moving to a judgment of a sound. So all of us, after it's a minute of listening to something which really invites you to a trip, because you are going somewhere with that sound and coming back in the end when it's finished. And then, because there is an idea, what did you hear, how fast we are coming to a judgment of something which we really don't know. And that judgment is so much showing also how easy we can put a label on something which is actually an invitation to experience something new. So that for me it is also kind of self-learning first of all, how difficult it is to listen to something that you don't know. Second of all, how fast you are making these judgments. And then you are glad when your judgment is really true. But what if it is not? And then there is the responsibility of your analysis of a sound. So, and it's also interesting how difficult it is to listen, because your own thoughts and associations immediately brings you to other spaces, and then instead of really listening to the sound, you listen to something else, but you still come to interpret the sounds that you were listening. So these are different levels of sophistication, actually, of sounds that we are all surrounded from outside and inside, that I think we are not aware. And also another point is that everyone here felt kind of pain. Pain was mentioned many times, loneliness, struggle, things like that, which I'm trying to think now how much it was really in sounds, or is it because of the weather today, or is it because of something that, as we said, was composed right here in this room, that we want to have this common feeling of nostalgia, pain, struggle, and something. So it's not, somehow the game moment is not there anymore. So it became more kind of sadness and loneliness of a sound.
Yeah, I didn't hear the pain at all when I was listening. But then when you spoke of longing and pain, it made sense to me. And so much of that came from Edgar's remarks, in this, inserting this kind of passion and pain. And so then it all made sense. But it wasn't there really when I was listening to the sounds for myself. Thinking back after.
In listening to some of the recordings, the sounds that I was really able to experience versus what I was trying to interpret were the sounds that I was unfamiliar with, some of the more ambient sounds. I was just thinking about, there are sounds around us all the time, those just hums of things going on that we don't take the time to try to figure out what it is. It's just a gentle hum versus, oh, that is something, and I know what that is, and clinging to that and trying to shape it in my mind versus just experiencing the sound. I think about the times that I've been on silent retreat where I may hear something and I experience that sound and it comes and it goes. It may be a bird or something if I'm outdoors. Whereas other sounds, if the person next to me is breathing heavily, where I cling to that sound and I just hear that breath and it creates a tension between us. But it's all about my interpretation. It's about how much form I want to give it in my mind versus how I allow that sound to just be. And then I don't even realize that it's there anymore until I claim it again. So it was interesting to hear the sounds that I wasn't familiar with without trying to create a story, whereas the ones that I thought I knew what was going on, then my mind just took me into a place that it was about me versus about what was happening in this room collectively.
Taking the microphone from you, Robert, whom I wanted to address. I heard many wonderful things, but I was particularly struck by your question of strategies and your demand that we apply them, and that unless they're laid out or developed collectively or not, a goal cannot be achieved or is not achieved. And I just tonight, at least, would like to question that, partially inspired by Edgar's presentation and his 3 words of the Valley of Harlem, which I thought were so incredibly powerful and so unexpected and opened so many different ways to consider something that were, powerful in itself, even if it only at this moment remains in this imaginary space or in the imagination. So this is essentially, I guess, a plea for the power of imagination and the engagement with the imagination as something quite specific and quite political, even.
I'm a ballroom ethnographer, and I've spent the last 10 years studying the ballroom scene. And I'll probably spend the next how many years I have left on this planet doing that, if I'm lucky. The Valley of Harlem is, for me, a separation space, a point where on Morningside Drive, I guess, or road, whatever it is, you can see Harlem. But there's a cathedral there, and the Upper West Side. And so what I was trying to think about, what I am thinking about when I'm there, is this enormous separation between the Upper West Side, Columbia, Union Theological Seminary, Jewish Theological Seminary, on and on and on, and the Valley of Harlem. So for me, the ballroom is a world, And one of the things the ballroom, I think, does is that it allows people to see themselves from a different perspective. And for me, the runway, the audience, is a valley. And I guess that's what I was thinking about. But from a purely political standpoint, the reason I study the ballroom scene, I found out, is because of my own working class roots. And coming from working class intellectuals who were religious. They didn't go to university, they didn't do any of that stuff. They were too smart for that. And they basically self-organized themselves in terms of self-defense, in terms of their culture, in terms of all that stuff. And that's what I studied in the ballroom scene. I studied people like Arbor, people like Vivica, who for me were working class intellectuals. And that's my passion. And the religious aspects for me in the United States, which is the most religious of the capitalist countries on the planet, from what I can tell, of the advanced capitalist countries, religion or religious discourse is the ordinary philosophical discourse of working people. That's it.
I'll say something very briefly about this issue of the imagination. In fact, this conference, the subtitle of the conference was The Horizon of Imagination. And it was an attempt to extrapolate some kind of theorizing of the political imaginary that is sort of immanent within art at all points through this figure of the horizon. It was an amazing performance over 3 days of an attempt to try and actually perform the justification for an idea that, in my experience and my listening, became increasingly formless as this moved ahead, precisely because the imagination was not situated. It was spoken about in many ways in a very, very ancient sort of struggle within art, as ancient as about 100 years, with the sort of rise of modernism, of this great valorization of the unique individual voice that sort of creates this individual vision, the idea of the imaginary as, in some sense, a manifestation of subjectivity, and subjectivity itself as being, in some way, a deeply solitary proposition. And so you actually get, and to me this is it's tied very, very strongly with, of course, the rise of consumer capitalism. And the idea of the labor of the artist being a kind of a manifestation of a certain promise of freedom, that is the imaginary illusion of a certain kind of capitalism. We are free to be ourselves. We are free to be individuals. We are free to imagine. Yet, in fact, that notion of being an unsituated, disconnected, and I would say sort of uninvested imagination is precisely the sort of structure of alienation that creates events like the one that I was at, where there is an enormous labor of analysis of the conditions of experience, but no understanding of how to act in order to try and actually transform or transcend that experience of alienation. And this was the deep absence, was a lack of an understanding of how to make a step, how to take a step forward. To sort of bring this back to the Vogue'ology, to the work on this project, I could say an enormous amount, but I will say, just give one very simple example. At the time that I started working with the ballroom community, which was 10 years ago now, was 10 years ago? Yeah. 10 years ago? 10 years ago. I was teaching at Columbia University. And I would have this experience of teaching at Columbia in the School of Public Health on 168th Street, and then on the same day coming downtown, not far from here, and meeting with people from the house ballroom scene. One of the, as a teaching medical anthropology, one of the core propositions of which is that experience is constructed. One could say constructed through history, constructed through power, it's contextualized. Probably the 3 years of coursework with students who were middle class, bourgeois, privileged for the most part, at Columbia University, to arise at actually an integration into their own sense of self, of the truth of the construction of experience. The incredible work that that would take in the classroom in order to arrive at that realization, to move it from proposition to application, to analysis, to application, to, in a certain sense, a recognition of one's own self. Many years. We had this experience of walking into that classroom for the love seminar, this very famous love seminar that Edgar and I taught together. In the ballroom, that is the proposition of life. It is constructed. That was where you started. There was no need to actually teach that sense that we actually are in relations of power, and that we are in history, and that who we are and who we are allowed to be is who we imagine, is in fact always conditioned by the material reality of, in the case of the New York City House Ballroom scene, this city, and its legacies and histories and its materialization literally in how those buildings of Columbia sit on that outcrop and sort of look out over, but in a certain sense have the most incredible difficulty engaging with this extraordinary value of Harlem, from which has been taken, from which has been mined over the years of the existence of Harlem, the most incredible riches, often without attribution. So that sense of incredible disjunction between one set of students and then another set of collaborators, with that understanding that we are always situated. With the students at Columbia, it was, in a certain sense, the battle to arrive at a different notion of individuality, one that was deeply embedded within a place, within a history, within a site, within a location. The ideological interpolation, which the university produces, the interpolation of oneself as a free individual, it's an enormous proposition to try and actually wrestle with. And I think the art world, in many ways, is deeply attached to that same interpolation. And trying to actually shift that to an understanding of a situated imagining is part of the work that we've been allowed to do here through the fellowship.
I have a question for you guys. What do you want to achieve? What's your hiatus? What's your intent? I'm not really sure.
It's a great question to have arrived at. I'm always interested in the demand behind that question. Will you resolve the confusion? Will the intention of the artist lift the cloud in some way? I don't have the answer.
Going back to what did I hear? I heard a lot of shattering. of just a lot of shattering of expectation, of just a lot of noise inside. And I like it. I wanted that, so I appreciate this.
The listening collectively, or to move collectively, or to do something collectively, it's like give us possibility to feel the happiness, because alone we cannot be happy. We can be happy only like when we are like doing step together, doing something to big event or to something. Yeah, we are on. So why we are sad? We don't have to be sad.
Yeah, I wanted to say in kind of response to what you're saying about kind of how being in a group or a collective and listening that way is it imposes upon how you listen and what you're trying to be correct. You're trying to. I don't think it's exactly being correct, and maybe it is sometimes, but for me, I try to be on guard about that. I wanted to say that there was one of the noises or one of the sounds that that was like very clearly people screaming, and I was disturbed because I couldn't tell if it was. And you put the words perfectly, joy or terror, and what I got out of that was like just sharing that feeling of the thing. There's I don't know, that kind of speaks to the collective spirit. Like what do you want to get out of it? Why do you need to be more than one? Because it feels, I don't know, there's just a great, in being understood, I guess, and knowing that what you felt was shared. I think that's maybe the intent, but I don't know what I think that is, but I think that's what I got out of collective listening. Joy and terror, spot on.
Yeah, that I'm going to follow up with what you just said, because I think that's really that example was really brilliant in the sense that it was the first time I'd ever thought of screaming as having a kind of language, and that I couldn't understand what was being said through those screams, and that was really profound. The other thing, what was I going to initially say? Yeah, it has to do with the idea of the amount of noise that surrounds the call to contemplation, which was one of the examples, with the call to prayer happening in the middle of commerce, in the middle of street vending and sales and consumption and food and life and traffic and everything else is happening, and there's over and above all of that is a call to pray and to contemplate and to find a moment to speak to and to be out, to communicate, to congregate, to do all those other things, and that is such an amazing other aspect to the noise, the noise with which we live, and the significant aspects of that noise which we associate with community. In other words, all of those, inside of all of that noise, there is content which gathers us together, and that could be bells, that could be a call to prayer, that could be the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, that could be the sound of a car going past and the music coming out, Al Green or whatever it is that comes out, and you just there's a moment that you share with somebody else, and I think that's one of the enormous privileges of living in a city like New York, is that we have acoustic communities on so many different levels, and and I use community in a completely other sense there, it brings us together nonetheless.
The Reverend is going to speak. This will be officially the last comment of the evening. Although Ultra Red has often been overruled.
I feel so much pressure. What I did want to say is thank you for your question, but thank you for your answer. I myself do a lot of, right now, work around the metaphor. And so this collective hearing, it's wonderful that you have no answer, that you put something out there and then you invited this community to come in and to say what you hear. Not telling us what we should hear, not requesting or demanding that we have an answer to what we heard, but inviting us to all hear individually but collectively at the same time. And so I think this is a wonderful thing because that's what life is all about. It's about what is your metaphor. And so I say thank you.
Thank you all.
Did you meet Stephanie? You introduced us. Reverend Stephanie Dussault. Nice to meet you.